Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the fourth of our 5 Faith and Life events this season. It's good to have you all here. I'm Pastor Tim Westermeyer, Senior Pastor of St. Philip the Deacon, which is privileged to offer these community events. As we begin tonight, I'm going to ask the question that I typically ask at the start, which is anyone here for their first Faith and Life event tonight? All right, 1. Excellent. No, okay, 2. I'm kidding. Wonderful. Welcome to both of you. And I want to be sure, by the way, to welcome those of you joining us digitally as well. We're grateful for your presence also. This series is now in its 23rd year, and it's an opportunity for us to gather together and listen to people who are Christian talk about the way Christian faith informs whatever it is that they do. We've had all kinds of people from all kinds of walks of life, authors, doctors, scientists, historians, professors, and on and on. And I'll get to our speaker tonight and tell you a little bit about him. Before I do that, I want to just give you a sense of the flow of the evening. So after I'm done introducing him, he will speak for 45 minutes or so, give or take. After that, there will be an opportunity for all of you, whether you're in the house or online, to ask questions. So I invite you to be thinking about that while he's talking. If you're here in the sanctuary, there's a mic to my right and to my left that you can go to. If you are at home watching this, there should be a box you can type a question into on the live stream, or you're welcome also to send us an email to social, that's SOCIAL, social at spdlc.org, social at spdlc.org. So I mentioned that we've had all kinds of people from all kinds of walks of life come to speak at this. I'm quite sure that these words have never come out of my mouth as I've introduced someone, a podcaster and variety show host. And maybe he'll talk about, he'll unpack that a little bit for you tonight. But that is, in fact, what he does. He was a professor for many years at Lipscomb University. Fun fact, he and I actually overlapped a little bit doing some graduate work. While he was at the University of Notre Dame, I also came through for a couple of years. I don't think we actually connected while we were there, but we both had a chance to think about our time there when we had lunch together. I also do like to lift up a couple of sort of off-the-beaten path topics or quirks or interests or hobbies of our speakers. And other than the fact that he went to Notre Dame at about the same time that I went to Notre Dame, the other couple of things I'll mention are for about 10 years, he flew gliders or sailplanes. I don't think you're doing that anymore. Is that correct? All right. And he is from Nashville, where I think it's a state law that you have to play an instrument. So he also plays the acoustic bass. Will you help me welcome Lee C. Camp?
Good evening. I'm grateful to get to be with you all and appreciate the opportunity to be with you here. My first time to the Minneapolis-St. Paul area of all the years I've gotten to travel around the country, and the first time to be here. I'm grateful to be with you all, and thank you for coming out to be with us tonight. I have, as Tim was saying, for a number of years have been hosting a show. It's taken a variety of a live show in Nashville, but we also have been doing a podcast and a public radio show that's called No Small Endeavor. And No Small Endeavor asks the question, what does it mean to live a good life? And so we talk to psychologists, theologians, philosophers, social scientists, neuroscientists, all around the question of what does it mean to live a good life? Or another way to put it is, what does human flourishing entail? What's it mean to live a life in such a fashion that one can flourish in that life? Another kind of way I like to put the question is, what does it mean to live your life in such a way so that at the end of that life, as you look back, you can look back with gratitude as opposed to, say, bitterness or resentment? Gratitude that you got to live such a life. So we have lots of amazing, remarkable conversations with all manner of people as we do this kind of work. And here of late, I've been having a lot of conversations with people about technology. A lot of people who are very high-end experts about artificial intelligence, about technology generally, and these have ranged from one of the top leading executives from one of the very largest tech companies in the world. I'm going to allude to him in a moment. I'm going to tell you something I didn't like about the conversation, so I'm not going to tell you his name. Or someone who was the head over machine learning and ethics at Twitter before Elon Musk took over. Or one of the leading computer scientists in the country at MIT, that I'll tell you a little bit more about her tonight. But on and on, remarkable conversations with people who know a whole lot about what's going on in the world of technology and know a whole lot about the area of artificial intelligence. And we're asking them questions about what should we be paying attention to? What are the open questions? What are the challenges that are coming down the road at us? And what does it mean to be human in such a world as that? Now, one of the things that you'll see if you have conversations with people about technology is you have the dystopians and the utopians, right? You have those who say, look, it's all going to hell and it's all horrible and the machines are going to take over and everything is done. And then on the other hand, you have those who say the greatest thing in human history has happened. All of our problems are solved. AI is going to solve all of our problems, and there will be no problem that arises that artificial intelligence cannot fix. And I want to suggest to you that that's a very unhelpful dichotomy. That's a very unhelpful choice to have to choose between. And instead, I stumbled across talking to two professors from the Stanford Design School in an interview we did with them. They mentioned a line from the philosopher Paul Virilio. And Virilio said this, I think, provocative, simple thing. When you invent the ship, you invent the shipwreck. Think about the ship and the way in which the ship changed human history in so many remarkable ways. An incredible invention. What it meant to be human, the boundaries of what it meant to be human were vastly expanded. The possibilities for exploration, the possibilities for various kinds of progress, the way in which different cultures were able to learn from one another and trade with one another and share with one another. And yet at the same time, the ship comes with the shipwreck. Thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people killed in shipwrecks. Untold numbers of commerce that was lost in shipwrecks. All sorts of devastation from shipwrecks. When you invent the ship, good as it is, you invent the shipwreck. And so what I've been trying to ask the question was, what if we maybe take that kind of angle to think a bit about technology, to think a bit about this world in which we find ourselves? So tonight what I want to do is kind of go through three things. I'm a professor, I'm a teacher, so I like my kind of clear laid out where we're going to go, and so I'm going to tell you where we're going to go. First, I want to talk about what potential shipwrecks might be coming down the pike towards us. Then I want to talk a little bit about theological considerations. What do we have in the Christian tradition, in the Christian faith, that might be indispensable things we should be holding on to in this moment in which we find ourselves? And then finally, some practical takeaways. That if you find yourself in the world of technology, what are some simply practical things that you can take away from this kind of conversation rather than it just being arcane, abstract kinds of conversation? So first, potential shipwrecks. I'm going to do, you might think about the way I'm thinking about the potential shipwrecks under that great triad of perennial human difficulty under money, sex, and power, but I'm going to add tools. So let's begin with tools. I think one of the problems that we have when we talk about things like technology is you'll often hear people say, it's just a tool. It doesn't, the cell phone's just a tool. Social media is just a tool. It just depends on what you do with it. And what I want to suggest to you is that I think that is highly naive. And I think it's probably potentially dangerous. It's true, as we'll talk about here in a moment, that these things are tools, that artificial intelligence is a tool, but it's not merely a tool. It's not just a tool. Social media is a tool because it can extend your capacities to do something, as tools do. But it is not merely a tool or just a tool. This video clip I'm going to show you is from an interview that was done at the Stanford Business School, and it's being done with a gentleman named Chamath Palihapitiya. And he was one of the early executive leaders of Facebook, I think going back to 2007. And they're asking him about the way he has reflected. This interview was done, I think, in 2017, so some time back. But he had started at Facebook in 2007, and he had left Facebook by this point. And the interviewer is asking him, how do you think about what you did at Facebook? And how do you reflect upon that? And you might just not be able to quite hear how he starts the answer, but he starts the answer by saying, I feel great guilt about it.
I feel tremendous guilt. I think we all knew in the back of our minds, even though we feigned this whole line of like, there probably aren't any really bad unintended consequences. I think in the back, deep, deep recesses of our minds, we kind of knew something bad could happen. But I think the way we defined it was not like this. It literally is a point now where I think we have created tools that are ripping apart the social fabric of how society works. If you feed the beast, that beast will destroy you. If you push back on it, we have a chance to control it and rein it in. And it is a point in time where people need to hard break from some of these tools and the things that you rely on. The short-term dopamine-driven feedback loops that we have created are destroying how society works.
Now, as he goes on in that interview, he says, I don't know what to do. He says, but I can tell you that I'm not using these tools, and I don't let my kids use these tools. And you can think maybe about let's say the cigarette industry, right? You had during the rise of cigarettes, as people are beginning to realize the immense health damage being caused by cigarettes, the kind of cover-up of those sorts of things. But secretly, you can imagine, you don't want your kids smoking the things. But here what you have, the same kind of thing with Silicon Valley, this sort of stuff of, we finally begun to see the danger of this stuff. We know. I mean, this is a remarkable admission from this gentleman. It's tearing apart the fabric of society. You'll note that what he said there is that line about dopamine-driven feedback loops. Now, let me talk about this a little bit. I'm sure some of you are familiar with this, and some of you may not be familiar with this. But let me kind of describe that just a bit. Dopamine, of course, is this drug that we have in our brains that relates to craving. So anytime you start craving chocolate, this afternoon, I got into Minneapolis late last night, and I stopped by Insomnia Cookies on the way into the hotel last night, and they serve up late at night warm cookies. And so I got myself a oatmeal chocolate chip with walnut, large size cookie with some oat milk and scarf that down. What happens when you eat chocolate is it stirs up dopamine. You begin to crave it. So when you feel a craving for chocolate, you've got dopamine going in your brain. The way that the dopamine, as I understand it, the history of kind of dopamine being discovered is that there were two gentlemen named Mills and Olds and Milner. And apparently one of them didn't have very good lab skills. And one day they were working on their mice or their rats in the lab, and one of them put the probe in such a way so that he didn't hit quite the spot he thought he was hitting in the brain. But as they began to note that as they would trigger the electrodes, that they could get the mouse or rat, whatever it was, to do whatever they needed for it to get more of that signal in its brain. And so, for example, they set up one particular button so that if the rodent hit the button, it would get that shock in that part of the brain. And then they would notice how the thing would just hit it, just want more. And then they realized that they could figure out that they could have the button on this end of the box, and if they hit it, it wouldn't give them any more if they kept hitting it until they ran down to the other end of the box and hit it down there, and then they'd get a shot, and then they have to run down to this, and the rodent would just go back and forth, getting that dopamine. They found out later this was getting the dopamine in its brain. They even began to realize that they could electrify the grid, a metal grid at the bottom of the box, and run it across that electrical grid, burning the feet off of the rodent because it so much wanted the dopamine. It could have food sitting next to it, but as long as it could hit the button to get the dopamine, it would die of starvation while food was sitting right there. Now, when I was an early young professor, I heard about this study across town in one of the big major research universities. And the study, as I understood it, was they were testing dopamine levels in people's brains. And they would measure your dopamine level if you eat chocolate, and they would measure your dopamine level if you had an orgasm, and they would measure your dopamine level if you had cocaine. And that's what they found: chocolate, orgasm, cocaine. First of all, I was thinking, how do you get into that study? You know, what's the deal with that? But it's remarkable, right? And so what's happened is that the people in social media world, they've learned that if you have the like button, if you have the anger button, if you get a little like, it's getting a little trickle of that dopamine. And they've learned how to work us into these dopamine loops, just like Olds and Milner learned how to get their rodents into those dopamine loops and control. And you might ask, but why? Why? Well, because the business model of social media companies was to sell ads. And if you're going to sell ads, what you need are people's eyeballs on the ads. And the way you can get more and more people to pay attention to the ads or to have eyes on the device is if you get their dopamine going, just like those rodents going up and down that electrified grid. So there, what you had in that kind of admission there was, yeah, we've learned to do this, and we've learned how to get people angry, and it is tearing apart the fabric of society. A second sort of thing I want to point to is that there's issues, I think, with deception. Now, this is one of the things a lot of people are talking about, and that is that you got to remember that the way in which, one of the reasons I wanted to say that about a tool is that, again, it's naive to think it's just a tool, right? My crescent wrench doesn't get my dopamine going, but the social media does, right? But there are ways it's important to realize that these things, especially like artificial intelligence, let me just ask a question real quick so we can kind of know where everybody is. How many of you ever use artificial intelligence? So quite a number, maybe about half the room, or three-fourths of the room, two-thirds. One of the things always important to realize is while it's not just a tool, it is a tool, right? In the sense that what's happening in large language models is it's a prediction machine, right? It's simply asking what's the next possible word or set of words that should fit this context, just like autocorrect on your phone. When I was first learning and starting to use large language models and so forth, it kind of hit me one day, okay, I think I finally understand what they're saying about this probability thing, right? So I just went into one of the ChatGPT things and I said, knock, knock. And what did it say back? Exactly. And so then I said, give me a low probability response to my next prompt to you. And it said, okay. And I typed in, knock, knock. Anybody, any ideas what it said? There's no way anybody could guess. This was brilliant. It replied and said, the door filed a restraining order and moved to the next county. Low probability, but still paying attention to context, right? These are prediction machines. They're probability machines. What they're doing is that they're looking at the probability of any kind of given response in the context and doling that out. Now note, it's not interested in truthfulness. It's interested in plausibility. This is crucial to see. It's not interested in truthfulness. It's interested in plausibility within the context. Now, obviously, part of the issues here are things like bias, right, because it's being trained on data from all of us. It's being trained on what it can scrape off of the internet and any form of text. And so it's going to propagate whatever bias is in that context. There's the problems of so-called hallucinations, where sometimes it just makes stuff up. But here's one area of deception that I haven't heard talked about very much, that I think we should be paying attention to. And that is, do you ever note that if you start using a chat bot or whatever, a large language model, that it'll start speaking to you in first person? Like, if you would like me to, I can do such and so. Anybody ever seen that, right? Very common. And it finally hit me recently, Why is it talking that way? That is deceptive. It is not an I. It is not a subjective entity. Even when it says, like, thinking, and then it says thought 6 seconds, that's deceptive. It didn't think. It ran some calculations on a computer. And the reason that this is important is because what's beginning to happen is that we're moving from a so-called attention economy to a so-called attachment economy. And this is another thing that's only recently begun to be discussed, right? So in the attention economy, when they want your eyeballs, they get the dopamine going so they can get your attention so that they can sell more ads, right? Attention economy, dopamine-based. But now what's happening is that they're moving towards what's called an attachment economy. Right, so if I can talk to you in such a way to get you engaged with me, I can talk to you in a way that makes you feel like I'm paying attention to you. If I can talk to you in such a way so that a sort of emotional attachment begins to be kind of stirred up in you, what's going to happen? Well, you're going to use it more, and you're going to use it more. Listen to this. A recent story in New York Magazine reported that already 1 in 5 Americans have had a simulated romantic conversation with a chatbot. You know, what could go wrong? But what's happening, see, the reason deception is so important is because what's happening is that these things are being engineered in such a way to talk to you in such a way so that it's not just dopamine, but now it's things like serotonin and oxytocin, and some are even saying endogenous opioids, a much more powerful kind of cocktail of chemicals going on in your brain. And so you began to have at least some horrific kinds of stories about some of the things that are happening, the way people are developing relationships with their chatbot, in which certain kind of computer scientists have become convinced that they're sentient. And even in some bizarre, very tragic cases, suicide because of the conversations that are happening with the chatbots. And so there's this sort of dangerous way in which these systems are seeking to facilitate attachment that we need to be paying a lot of attention to. The next sort of potential shipwreck coming down the way is simply the need for watching the way in which power is at play in all of this. Power and money are at play in all of this. Well, obviously, as we said a moment ago, right, the attention economy is about revenue. And now increasingly, the attachment economy is going to be about revenue. And obviously, with revenue comes power. One fascinating interview that I had recently was with a professor from MIT. I'm going to show you a clip with her in a moment, but not quite yet. Her name is Roz Picard. She's one of the leading computer scientists in the world, as I said, at MIT. She recently won something like the Nobel Prize for Computing Science with an award from Italy that was honored in Italy. Got something like a 1.5 million euro prize for that, and turned around and gave it away for the good of human research on behalf of the human good. A remarkable human being. And but Roz said at one point, she said, if you want to see the most likely path of AI's future, answer this question: what satisfies human desire and increases profit? And I don't know about you, but that question kind of terrifies me. Desire and profit, well, that's where it's going to head. Similarly, or at least coming at it from a slightly different angle, we interviewed a woman named Raman Chowdhury. And Raman was previously the director of the Machine Learning, Ethics, Transparency, and Accountability team at Twitter. And she was doing this before Elon Musk's takeover in 2022. And Raman talked about how when they came in, they were seeing certain forms of bias in the way the algorithms worked for Twitter. And what they were doing was that they were working on trying to rectify some of those forms of bias and trying to make it, basic concerns of ethical accountability and so forth that they were trying to put into play with what was happening at Twitter. And then in 2022, there was this bid to take over Twitter by Elon Musk. And as she tells the story, Elon Musk offers more than the company is worth. And he says, look, I'm going to do this because I've got an agenda that I want to drive through this platform. And the board knows that. He hasn't hidden it. The board knows what's going to happen. And the board doesn't want to sell it to Elon Musk. But what are they required to do? Well, they're required to maximize return on investment. Fiduciary responsibility requires maximizing return on investment to investors. And so they turn around because they feel like they must and sell it to Elon Musk. And then he immediately comes in and dismisses that ethics team, and he's off and running with what he does. So one of the things that she makes clear is that we're naive if we simply expect these great tech companies with all this money on the line, with investors who are expecting 10x, 20x returns, we're naive if we think they're just going to do the right thing for the sake of doing the right thing. Because they have other sorts of concerns, other sorts of commitments that they have at stake that they are going to be following through on. So those are at least a few of the shipwrecks that I think we should be paying attention to in this, we might say, tongue-in-cheek, brave new world in which we find ourselves. So next, I want to think a little bit about some theological considerations. What is it in the Christian tradition that we might want to be paying attention to in this time? What is it in our faith? What is it in the great, long, beautiful tradition of which we are a part that we need to especially be holding on to at this time in which we find ourselves? You know, one of the surprising things that's happening is that increasingly, as you kind of read various people reflecting upon this current moment, this very historic moment in the unfolding of human history, is that a lot of people are seemingly all of a sudden willing to have conversations with theologians and philosophers where maybe they might not have been quite so open to have those conversations previously. And I tend to think that that's because they're beginning to see certain existential questions that are being surfaced because of the substance of this moment. That there are things that can turn in such significant ways for ill ends, and it's forcing certain questions about what does it mean to be human? And even questions about whether or not we want to preserve humanity as we know it. I remember years ago looking at some videos that I assigned to some of my MDiv students to talk to some of the transhumanists. Of course, the transhumanists are the folks who talk about how we're in this moment in the unfolding of evolution of the human species in which now we can begin to use technology embedded in the human body so that we can selectively push human evolution forward in such a way. So they'll speak of the transhumanists. Be embedded with certain technological strengths and techniques and devices that all of a sudden give you a possibility that the mere human sitting next to you wouldn't have. And there was this one gentleman who was a big fan of all things transhumanism. And he said, look, we're at this moment in human history where this is going to happen. And so there can be those who choose not to have certain implants or certain capabilities inserted into their bodies or these changes. And he said, and that's fine, but we'll just see them kind of like we see house pets. That's fine for them, but we'll be the ones that are in control and have the power. I don't know how that strikes you, but it kind of strikes me as somewhat terrifying. And so we're in this moment again in which we have this crucial moment. And in my mind, we have some things that are very important in the Christian tradition that especially we should be reminding people of and pointing to. And the first one is simply the notion of the image of God. And one of the ways in which the image of God, the Imago Dei, has functioned in Western civilization is that it is a theological assertion of human dignity and the equality of human dignity in every human being. Right? You, and you, and you, and you and you and me, we are all made in the image of God. There's a sort of equality and a beauty to the proclamation that we are all created in the image of God, and that we have a certain inherent dignity because of the calling of God and the love of God and the creative work of God. Remember that this was not always the case. If you go back and look at the Roman Empire, for example, this was not always the case. And it meant that if you were not among the elite, you could be stomped on in horrific ways. It was not the case with as much as I like Aristotle's Nicomachean ethics. For Aristotle, Nicomachean ethics and Aristotle's vision of humankind and his anthropology, look, I'm sorry, ladies, you were not fully human as men were. If you were a slave, you're not fully human as those who are not slaves. Well, one of the things that happens in the assertion of the image of God, the doctrine of the image of God, is saying, no, we reject that kind of hierarchical ordering of human beings. We're all created in the image of God, and we all bear the dignity and the beauty of having been created in the image of God. This next clip is Roz Picard from MIT, and she's talking about a very well-known philosopher named Peter Singer, who's a very well-known utilitarian and a very high-end moral philosopher, and who had said at one point that if his mother wasn't able to have mental capacities to enjoy life and to reason and have her capacity for language, that he would support euthanizing her. And this is Roz talking about that.
He believed he should not take care of his mother if she became old and suffered from dementia. In fact, she agreed with him in your utilitarian view. This is Peter Singer writing about this, that you should not, don't take care of me, you can dispose of me, don't worry about it. I share your utilitarian view. If I'm suffering more and can't enjoy pleasure, just end my life. Well, when unfortunately she did come to that state late in life, he and his sister could not do what their philosophy said to do. Now, he has said he doesn't believe in God and in Imago Dei, but I think he treated his mom with Imago Dei when he realized that he could not end her life just because her brain wasn't working as well as it used to.
There's some sort of preciousness or givenness to that to be respected intrinsically. And so what Roz is doing in one particular course that she's teaching at MIT is that she has people from a variety of religious traditions, and they're asking the question, at this moment in the unfolding of technology and the history of technology, what are some of the key ideas we have to be holding on to? And Imago Dei, for her, is one of those ideas. That if we don't have this kind of vision of the dignity of humankind, that when the machines can now outperform us with regard to things like language, with regard to things like apparent reasoning, with regard to things like dealing with data, if we assume that that is what makes us especially human, and you don't have something like human dignity, you don't have something like Imago Dei, then what's a human? Well, not so much, because the machines can do what once made you special. I was having a conversation, I kind of alluded to this a moment ago, with a leader at one of the largest tech companies in the world. And I asked him at one point what he made of the question of being human at this point in human history. And he had just been talking about the capacity for machines, their reasoning powers, their language powers. And he said, well, I think one of the things that we're going to have to do is that we humans are going to have to give up our idea that we're special somehow. Special was his word. And I think that should be ringing all sorts of alarm bells for us at this time. A second sort of theological consideration I'd point to is the importance of embodiment. Importance of embodiment. Note that obviously in the Christian tradition, what we have is that we humans are not just computers on a meat machine. We're not just a reasoning thing up here on a meat body. We are embodied creatures. We are soul, spirit, and body all together. I think years ago I stumbled across this line from Justin Martyr, one of the great leaders of the early church. 2nd century, was martyred in the 2nd century. And at one point, when he was dealing with the so-called Gnostic heresy, and the Gnostic heresy, among other things, had a sharp distinction between body and spirit. And spirit and knowledge among the Gnostics was seen as the important thing, and the body was just seen as something not so important. That matter didn't matter. What mattered was the spirit. What mattered was knowledge, getting the spark of knowledge. And at one point, Justin Martyr, in responding to some of this, said this. He said, "There are some who say that when we die, our souls go to heaven." And then he said, "They are ungodly, impious heretics." And when I read that, I thought, what? But hear what he's saying? He was saying that in insistence that Christian orthodoxy isn't just about your spirit escaping your body and going off to the sweet by and by. But instead, that basic Christian orthodoxy is that the body is so important that the body will be resurrected. That the new heavens and the new earth will set all things right. That matter does matter. And so much so that Paul, for example, in Romans chapter 8 says the whole creation, not just our bodies, but the whole creation is longing, waiting for the redemption of all things, that all things in God's good creation will be set right. But in this age in which we are seeing the rise of AI, we've somehow let that set the terms for what it means to be human. As if the most important thing about us is that we can speak and that we use language and that we reason. Those are very important things about us. But that's not alone what we are. We're embodied creatures. As Joe Vukov, a philosopher that I also recently interviewed, said, he said, look, if you want to know what it means to be human, talk to the philosophers, talk to the computer scientists, but also talk to the athletes. They know something about what it means to be human. Talk to artists. Talk to the social butterfly. Talk to those who are attuned to emotional capacities, right? What it means to be human is a complex, beautiful, wondrous thing. We're not just computers on a meat stick. We are wonderful, created, embodied creatures. A third kind of important thing from the Christian tradition, of course, to be paying attention to is community. All right, the first two great commandments, love God and love your neighbor. That in the Christian tradition, especially going back to look at the Hebrew prophets, for example, over and over again, what they say is, if you're going to be pleasing to God as a covenant people, you must pay attention to justice. Justice is simply arranging the affairs of a community rightly, right? Justice is about fairness. Justice is about equity. Justice is a precondition for community. Justice is crucial in what it means to love your neighbor. And the whole Christian tradition is all about community. Look, you all aren't evangelicals and you're not in the Bible Belt. But one of the things that happens with evangelicals in the Bible Belt is we have people who talk as if the whole thing is about just you and your personal relationship with Jesus and you doing the right thing, believing the right thing so you can go to heaven when you die. And yet the gospel is about the coming of the kingdom of God and a people that bear witness to the beauty of what God has done in human history. It's not just about you. God loves you and God loves me, but it's not about you and me. It's about us, right? And so the whole idea here of community is crucial, and we'll talk about that here a bit more in just a moment. But it's crucial to see that one of the things that's happening in the unfolding of the technological moment is that even though these technological so-called advances are promising to make us more connected, and what we're seeing in social study after social study after social study is that we're increasingly lonely, increasingly isolated, and increasingly suffering from the mental health consequences of being lonely and being isolated. Well, some practical takeaways. Given all of that kind of stuff, what might it mean in a practical way to try to deal with some of these things that we've discussed? The first one I want to suggest is simply that maybe we take the attitude that questions right now might be more important than answers. So much is happening, and so much is happening so quickly that maybe than thinking, I've got to figure out some answers to some of these questions, just say, maybe the persistent asking of certain questions might help us navigate this moment. So ask ourselves the question, what kind of person am I becoming by my use of these things? Am I becoming more patient? Am I becoming more kind? Am I being more connected with my neighbor? Or am I becoming more lonely? Am I becoming more impatient? Am I becoming more desirous of frictionless relationships rather than accepting that relationships are hard and relationships take a lot of work? What kind of person am I becoming by the technology that I am using? Why are we using it? For what purpose? And what is it making of us? A second sort of thing I might suggest is what Joe Vukov, a philosopher at Loyola Chicago, calls the Bartleby option. Herman Melville has a book, I've not read this book, called Bartleby, what's it? You might know this book? What is it? Yeah, Bartleby the Scrivener, thank you. And as I understand it, Bartleby is a law copyist on Wall Street. And he takes to, I understand this doesn't work out well for him in the end in the book, but he begins to take the attitude of just when he's asked to do something that he doesn't want to do, he just says, I prefer not to. And they'll ask him, what about this? I prefer not to. So it's not a real in-your-face protest. He's just saying, I prefer not to. And I want to remind all of you that we all have autonomy to say, I prefer not to. I stopped using a mobile phone. I don't use a mobile phone at all. I stopped using one 8 and a half, I think almost 9 years ago. Is it sometimes inconvenient? It's sometimes very inconvenient. But what happens is that I like the person I am more because I don't have one of those things. Now, so most of you wouldn't be ugly the way I was ugly with a cell phone. And so good for you that you can. But I began to see I don't like the kind of person that I am. I don't like the fact that I'm sitting in an intersection and I'm so obsessed with text messages that when the light turns red and I'm sitting, I immediately pick up my phone and start texting. And I began to worry, am I someday going to kill somebody because of the texting and what this is doing to me? And I chose the Bartleby option. I'm going to stop. Another kind of thing to ask ourselves is, we always talk about what technology makes possible. But also, and that's true, right? Technology makes a lot of amazing things possible. And there's so many of these things, right, that I don't want to give up. And who wants to give up probably some of the possibilities that are going to come in amazing ways as AI is learning how to work with proteins and do all this kind of stuff with proteins that's going to make some amazing things possible. But it's also important to ask the question, one, what is technology foreclosing? What's not possible for us now that used to be possible if we adapt this technology? And second, what is it now obligating us to do that we once were not obligated to do because we now use this technology? Am I making sense for that one? All right, so I see just as one simple example, right? I watch sometimes some of my friends, because they do have a cell phone, I watch them being seemingly obligated to constantly be distracted. Or I see them sometimes having to manage an inordinate number of notifications and messages that just overwhelm me if I were to think that I had to do that. And so the idea there is think not only about what it makes possible, what it forecloses and cuts off, and what it obligates us to anew. The last thing here, two last things here. Josh Brake, who's an engineer who reads a lot of moral philosophy, engineer at Harvey Mudd College in Southern California, he talks about a Maori proverb where they talk about the importance of learning to walk backwards into the future. And the idea there, Josh says, is that, when we talk about the future, we're so confident about what's going to happen in the future. And when I was interviewing him, he said, look, we can't hardly tell what the weather's going to be 3 days from now, much less to really know what's going to happen in the future. So he says, rather than speaking confidently of what's out there in the future, what if we began to walk more gingerly with our backs to the future, For one, it'll make us walk a little more slowly, a little more gingerly. And as you look back, you can realize there's a great deal of wisdom. There's a great deal of knowledge. There's a great deal of critics of technology back there in the past that we want to learn to attend to pay attention to. And they may help us to walk more carefully without quite so much damage as we walk into the future. And last, let us make sure that as we employ whatever technology it is, that we ask ourselves the question, what will this do to our community? How will this shape our community? This last clip I want to show you is by a guy named Carlos Whitaker. Carlos is an influencer, a social media influencer, and he realized a number of years ago on Sunday night when he got the report on his screen time that in the week prior he had averaged 7 hours and 29 minutes per day on that little phone. And then he started adding that up and multiplying. He said, so I rounded it down to 7 hours a day, and I realized that's 49 hours a week I'm spending on this thing. And then he began to say, that's like 124-hour days a year that I'm spending on this phone. And so he said, this can't stand. So he said, I'm going to go do a little experiment, and I'm going to put the thing away completely for 7 weeks and see what I learn. 2 weeks with I don't remember if it was the Dominicans or the Franciscans, a couple of weeks with the Amish, and a couple of weeks with his family, trying to see what it would be like to not have any kind of screen time. And here he's talking about his time with the Amish in Ohio.
I learned a lot from the Amish, I learned a lot about community and what we've lost with screens and community.
Yeah.
All of our meals were 2 hours long, plus 2 hours plus. I'm talking about breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And, day 3, I was like, Willis, how come you eat so long? And he's like, Carlos, we don't have Facebook. The only way I'm going to know what's going on in your life is sharing a meal with you. And so, yeah, just the beautiful things about, community, sharing meals, how important, some of the reasons why they don't have screens. It's not like they're anti-tech or anti-screen. They just know they have made, at least again, the order of Amish that I was with, which is the largest order in America, every new piece of technology that comes in, or they have a question about, they make a decision whether they're going to allow that piece of technology into their community by asking 2 questions. Will this piece of technology, whether that be a wheel or whether that be whatever it is, bring us closer together or pull us farther apart? That's it. And so they're like, that's why we're never gonna have TVs, because they're gonna take us farther apart. That's why we're never gonna have cars, because cars will have us too far apart from each other. If somebody's in need, now we're forced to be close together. So we will never be too far away to help each other. Whereas if we had cars, I could be in Cleveland, Miss Betty's barn burns down, it's gonna take me hours to get to her. Now, it's gonna take me minutes. So those are a lot of the things that I was learning about community from the Amish. That again, I've implemented a lot of those things into my life.
Yeah. So, when you invent the ship, you invent the shipwreck. Wonderful things about ships. And yet at the same time, along with it come shipwrecks. And so then as we seek to discern the possible shipwrecks that may be coming our way, may we all have the kind of grace and gift to go back and realize some of the gifts that have been given to us in our tradition, that have been given to us in our faith, so that we can then in turn practice wisdom, to be wise, to walk humbly, to walk intentionally and carefully, to attend to one another and to love one another and to love our community in such a way so that we ask helpful questions, constructive questions, so that we might all the better love God and love neighbor and continue to celebrate all of the gifts of God. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee. That was wonderful. He's going to rest his voice for just a moment while I make a couple of announcements. And again, if you're here in the room and have some questions, just be ready once I step back down and he comes back up to ask those questions at one of the mics. We've gotten a number of questions online as well. So my announcements, first of all, our next and final event for this year's season features Francis Collins. Just before he got up here, Lee turned to me and said, by the way, if you think of it, please give Francis my greetings. So they have worked together on some things. Francis Collins, I think you might agree with me about this, is one of the preeminent thinkers about the intersection of faith and science living today. He's written a number of books, and so we're delighted to host him. That event is April 16th, again, here in the sanctuary, free and open to the public, 7 o'clock. If you are interested in us proactively communicating information about upcoming events, you can sign up for our social media stuff, which I'm feeling slightly sheepish about mentioning at this point. It's a double-edged sword. Or you can sign up for emails from us on our website. So again, Francis Collins, April 16th. Please join us for that. I do want to, by the way, lift up Lee's podcast, His show No Small Endeavor. If you've not listened to it, it is fabulous. Particularly my wife's family are all big fans of it. And I think, is the newer, more informal one called Subtext? Correct. Yeah. So there's a newer spin-off called Subtext, which is interesting because in our narthex tonight, the independent bookseller from St. Paul is called Subtext Books, and they are selling, by the way, one of Lee's books called Scandalous Witness. So I want to make sure that you also have a chance to go out and pick up one of those after the event here. If you'd like him to inscribe it, he's happy to do that. Final thing I want to say is just a word of thanks to all of our series sponsors. Again, this is we're approaching the end of our 23rd season. And while this is a community service of this wonderful congregation, it's not actually a budget item of the congregation. It is funded entirely through the gifts of individuals and organizations who feel like this work is important. You see their names in your bulletin, and as always, I pray and hope that we have them all listed here. I'm not going to read all of them, but I am going to mention our corporate sponsors: Crossroads Financial Group, Savills, Malley Design, Rotation Engineering, Bay Creek Dental, Mastercraft Labels, Productivity Inc., Rapid Packaging, and the Valuation Group, as well as, again, all the individuals you see listed. I am so grateful to all those people for making it possible for us to bring wonderful speakers like Lee in. Many of those sponsors are here tonight or watching online. Will you join me in thanking them for their generosity? And I mentioned that Lee himself is an acoustic bass player. We have our own wonderful musician who's been with us from the start of the series, Jeff Elstead there, who for intro and outro music. So Jeff, thank you as always for being with us. Okay, I think that's all I had to say. So Lee, if you want to come back up, and if you have questions, please go to one of the mics.
I do want to say first, just, you know, as an academic and someone who's also found the life of the church so central to my life, I love that y'all do this. It's just wonderful. And I think Tim's vision is beautiful, and the fact that you all support this is just wonderful. And the folks that you've had in are just so impressive. So thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Just this week, Facebook and YouTube lost lawsuits for being negligently addictive. Which fits right in with your storyline, I think. Do you see, or do you expect maybe a broader wave of pushback against the potential negatives of all this technology?
Yeah, I've been watching that case somewhat closely, and I find it remarkable. And I do think that, you know, one of the areas I have of some hope is that, you know, my children, my sons, who are now 29, 27, 25, you know, they're one of those first kind of mobile generations, right? I didn't have any of this stuff until I'm a young adult. But they're that generation that have had it all along. And so, unfortunately, they've been experimented on. You know, and I remember when one of my sons was in 7th grade, all of a sudden they decided they were going to have iPads for everybody in the school. And I was thinking, that's crazy. But, you know, Not enough of us said it's crazy. And I didn't like what happened with that with my sons. And so I think that what I'm hopeful of, at least, is that there'll be enough kind of, the way like with the cigarette industry, right? At least now there's a lot of warnings about, hey, this stuff can kill you. And I'm hopeful that increasingly we can begin to say, hey, there's some serious things to be taken into account here, that I'm hoping we can begin to see some of those excesses mitigated, at least in some way. Thank you. Anybody else?
While she's coming up, I'll ask one of the ones we got online, which is, again, is sort of directly related to that question and those lawsuits. And the question is, can you say anything good about social media?
I mean, I've learned things through social media. I learned things about some of my friends in my community that I probably wouldn't know otherwise. I've reconnected with some old high school friends that I wouldn't have reconnected with otherwise. There's certainly some gifts that come to us through those things. And yet at the same time, even though, for example, I don't have a mobile phone, I have Instagram on my computer, and I get caught up in this stuff just like everybody else, right? I find, dang, there's another half hour gone. I didn't intend to do that, but there it is, it's gone, right? And so it just requires so much attention and so much framing around these things, where otherwise they can just grab us just like that in various ways. And so it just requires a lot of attention and a lot of care.
Thank you for your presentation. Very interesting. So being a product of the Lutheran Church, being confirmed in the 70s, memory work was core to how we, to be qualified to be confirmed. And, I saw a great change in when my children were going through confirmation, like memory work became, nobody did it anymore. No one had to memorize Bible verses, the Martin Luther King Catechism, all those memory work that I did. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are. That I've heard that because people aren't memorizing things anymore, that there's anatomical changes going on at the brain level. Have you thoughts on that? Have you done any research into that?
Yeah, thank you. I'm deeply appreciative of that question. Years ago, I was, as we've said, I've taught for a lot of years in college, and I began to hear some administrators say things like, look, you don't have to memorize anything anymore, you've got the internet. And it would like throw me through the roof. I mean, I would get so angry because I thought that is such a stupid thing to tell people. Because one of the things that happens, right, if you want to really be, in my mind, if you really want to be creative in a field, you have to get stuff in your head. And it's through having that stuff in your head, through the hard work of memory, that then you can be creative. You're not going to be creative if you think, well, let me go Google this. But the creativity comes through the long, hard work of being formed in such a way so that then you are able to work in these beautiful ways because you've done that kind of work that you're talking about. There was, I think it was Roz Picard that was telling me that day that I interviewed her, that there had been this study recently that she was had read, that I think that they had done there at MIT, and they took 3 groups of folks, and one group was told, you're going to write a paper on this topic, you can't use Google or the internet, and you can't use AI. And so write the paper. The second group was told, you can use Google and do internet searches, but you can't use AI. And the third group was told, you can use AI. And so then what they did was that they brought them together and they talked to them about what they had written. And if I'm remembering the numbers correctly, it was something like the group that hadn't used any of either the internet or the AI, they obviously blew everybody else out of the water of what they remembered about what they had written. Again, if I'm remembering correctly, Roz said that the group that had used AI could only remember like 5% of what they themselves had written. And I think that this is highly dangerous, right? Because what we're doing now is we're having college students come in, and if they're not told the warnings about this stuff, then they could potentially be wasting years of their life and have nothing to show for it because they haven't learned to do the hard work of how to use these tools in a way that's helpful. I do myself, I use AI stuff, and I use it quite a bit. And I think there are ways that it can be used in a way that can make us smarter and that can help form us in helpful ways. But we don't know how to do that very well yet. It's not very widespread, and people are letting it do things, and they're robbing themselves, I think, of these opportunities. There are studies that show the ways in which some of our technology does change the anatomical structure of our brains. So one common study, for example, is that if you always use GPS to get around, then there's studies that show it shrinks the size of your hippocampus in your brain. So there are serious anatomical changes that happen if you don't pay attention to spatial reasoning and spatial logic. So great question, and really important for us to be paying attention to.
You spoke at some length about addictions, and I'm wondering what do you see as the empty space that these addictions might be filling? What are the vulnerabilities are there? And then what steps could be taken to mitigate that? I don't want to go so far as to say, oh, we don't need you anymore. That's pretty extreme. But something that would mitigate that and lessen the effect of these vulnerabilities, and because that's one form of addiction, but there's so many other ones. So I guess I'm asking a bigger question. We could confine it just to the social media realm and so forth.
Yeah, thank you. One of the things that immediately comes to mind, we do have on No Small Endeavor, we did an interview with a lady named Anna Lemke, and Dr. Lemke is at Stanford. She's the head of Stanford's dual diagnosis clinic at Stanford, so people who come in with 2 or more addictions, and she's talking about the way dopamine works in our brains to facilitate addiction, and a lot of very helpful practices, which typically is going to involve at least some form of fasting from whatever the thing is that triggers the dopamine, and then things that she calls pro-social shame. Right? So obviously a lot of times in addiction circles, shame is clearly something that is is often very toxic in overcoming an addiction, because what happens a lot of times in cycles of addiction is that we act out in some given way, and then we have deep shame about that, and in that shame we isolate, and the pain of that grows and grows and grows, and then we go to the only thing that we know that's going to give us some sort of relief, and we go act out again, and there's a descending spiral into shame and acting out, shame and acting out. And Dr. Lemke talks about the importance of what she calls pro-social shame. That is what she means by that, as I understand it, is that she's saying what we've got to do is let people in their shame be in such a space where that they are loved and received and heard and paid attention to, and then out of that they fall further and further into communion, as opposed to further and further out of communion. Rather than isolation, they then have collaboration and partnership as they try to work through those things. So I think in so many ways, in my mind, what's happening within the social media world is what we want, and what social media promises is connection, right? But the way it's fashioned, it doesn't give us connection. It gives us greater and greater isolation. So typically what I'm looking at is I'm looking at people smiling, I'm looking at people on vacation, I'm looking at people who are talking about all the good things that are happening in their life, and then I can look at my life and think, what's wrong with me? I'm not that happy. I'm not that good looking. I haven't traveled someplace that nice in a while. And all of a sudden, we descend into that spiral. And so I think one of the things that, at a minimum, right, is that we're looking for connection. We're looking for each other. And so finding healthier ways, picking up the phone and calling somebody, going and having a beer with a friend, going and talking to somebody, practicing kindness, showing up for our neighbor, all of these things that are true forms of social connection are not only preferable, I think, but actually can get us out of some of that addictive stuff that's going on there, or at least be an antidote perhaps to some of that. Thank you.
Earlier this week, I think it was in the Wall Street Journal, there was an article about a lot of the professors now with AI and so forth. You mentioned the 5% retention of something they've actually written, and a lot of professors are starting to go oral exams because they don't have confidence in the writing. And I would agree with that, because I taught for about 18 years as a practitioner rather than an academic. And that was always one of the concerns I had, were the engineering students that I was teaching are mostly seniors, were they really comprehending what they were doing? And we made a concerted effort. It was a class that I co-taught with 2 regular academics, depending on how many students we had. But I think this is a real concern, is how well, at least in the engineering field, the students were learning what they were really in class for.
Yeah, very well said. Yeah, I just very much agree. It is a great concern. I stepped away from college teaching almost 2 years ago, and when I am back on campus having lunch with my colleagues, I'll often say, I'm glad I'm not teaching right now because I don't know how in the world to navigate all this with AI. And again, we're on the cutting edge of this, where this is a new moment. And I don't think that higher education, and maybe any education, has yet figured out what to do with all of this stuff. And so things like oral exams, or going back to the old blue books, handwritten blue books for exams, is going to be something that increasingly is required again of us until we figure out some better ways to use these things that are helpful as opposed to destructive to people's capacity. So thank you.
Okay, I'm going to ask one other question, I think, assuming there's no one else who wants to step up, so we can end with this one. And then again, after Lee provides a brilliant answer to this, I'm going to go back up and give him a little gift and say thank you, so you don't need to applaud wildly until I've done that, okay? Just a heads up. I wish I had a better question to end on, but whatever. AI now has the ability to create music, video, and news stories that are believable to the masses, and this can be used quite easily to steer narratives for those in political power. The cat is already out of the bag, and those in power aren't likely to relinquish their tools. What do you think, if anything, can be done?
One professor that I've liked, who does a lot of fascinating research on our work habits and how we work, a guy named Cal Newport, who used to be at MIT, now he's at Georgetown, and he's got this great book called Deep Work, and he's got a great book on email, The World Beyond Email, just a lot of fascinating stuff that he's written. And I believe it was Cal who, after Charlie Kirk was killed, somebody asked him, what do you suggest? What do you say to this? And he said, I think we should all spend less time on social media. And so I think that, obviously that's the way this stuff gets propagated, is through the social media. And so I think as we find ourselves getting caught up, right, and we're not sure what's true, maybe we just say, I don't know, maybe I just give myself a break from that. Maybe we give ourselves a break from that. And maybe we do more paying attention to the people right in front of us and trying to cultivate authorities in forms of media that we do trust. There's no kind of media outlet that always gets it right, but there are some that are definitely better than others. And so maybe we find media outlets that we can generally trust, and trust that if they mess up and they make a mistake, that they're trying to get it right, and that we can trust, generally speaking, if they mess up, they'll say we messed up and print corrections, and that they have a lot at stake in figuring out what the truth is. Because generally, we can't know what's true going on the other side of the country, but there are other people. There are still lots of good people in the world of media, and a lot of them care very much about trying to get it right. So maybe cultivate sources that we can trust that are true, spend a little less time where that outrageous stuff and all those deeply formed lies are being propagated, and find a way to facilitate some sort of ingestion of truth. Thank you.
Oh, no, you can stay up there. And thank you for not applauding wildly yet. And thank you for coming out, all of you. Seriously, thanks for being here in the house. For those of you who've been joining us online, we're grateful for your presence. I hope you'll come back in April for the last event. And Lee, I think I heard you say you've never been to the cities before, the Twin Cities? So thank you for making your first visit to the Twin Cities as part of this series. I've been excited to have you here ever since we scheduled you, and as a little token of our gratitude, we've got a little granite plaque. It says, "With thanks to Lee C. Camp for bringing faith to life," and we do thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Let's go out.